Fullmetal Alchemist is incredibly unique amongst its anime peers. 2009's Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is widely considered to be one of the greatest anime ever created, and before Brotherhood was even a thing, the original 2003 anime was given similar treatment from the anime community during the 2000s. Since then, while Brotherhood has gone on to become the more popular anime of the two, 2003 still remains incredibly well loved with a huge following within the FMA community, alongside heavy debate over which version is better. If you've been a part of these debates, you'll usually hear a lot of common arguments from both sides. 2003's ending sucked, Brotherhood skims the first couple chapters, 2003 has too much filler, Brotherhood has too much humor. But what I find to be the most fascinating common argument is this: the homunculi were better in 2003. Amongst the many points people have in favor of 2003, if it's not the aforementioned point about Brotherhood skimming chapters, I see this one cropping up the most. The homunculi in both versions of Fullmetal Alchemist are the main recurring antagonists, their jobs being to mess around with the main characters under the orders of the villains of both series, Dante in 2003 and Father in Brotherhood. Their roster is made up of a bunch of characters based on the 7 deadly sins, lust, gluttony, envy, greed, wrath, sloth, and pride. While at face value, these squads appear very similar, aside from sloth, wrath, and pride being completely different characters in each version, under the surface there is a major difference in their characterization. The main reason people cling to the attitude that 2003 did the homunculi much better is because in that version their origin point is much different and much more tragic. In Brotherhood they're each spawned off the main antagonist, Father, who rid himself of his sins to create them. However, in 2003, each one of them is the result of human transmutation, an attempt to bring a human back to life with the power of alchemy. This fundamentally makes each of them much more tragic, and the series makes it a point to tackle the ethics of bringing humans back to life, with each homunculi having their own struggles, desire, and feelings that the series acknowledges. They are given a much deeper layer of tragedy, and to some are much deeper, more compelling characters compared to their Brotherhood counterparts who are often said to simply be just some evil guys who do some evil things because they're told to. This is a common sentiment amongst FMA fans, even a lot of fans of Brotherhood agree to this. But I don't. In fact, I feel the exact opposite. While I commend Studio Bones for their attempts to do something different and interesting with their own take on the homunculi, I think with little exception, Brotherhood's take on the homunculi runs circles around their 2003 counterparts, and are even part of the reason I came to prefer Brotherhood over 2003. Now, the reason I want to make this video is absolutely not to dunk on FMA03, call it mid, drag it through the mud, make fun of 2003 fans and their inability to read. No. I love 2003 a lot, and it's a shame some people are quick to write it off. However, I do think the underlying reasons for the very common sentiment that the 2003 homunculi are better than their Brotherhood counterparts needs to be scrutinized, because to me, it shows a fundamental lack of understanding as to what makes good, memorable characters, and instead focuses on how deep and tragic they are, something which actually extends to analysis of 2003 as a whole, which often focuses on how deep and depressing it is and not, well, if it's actually a good, entertaining narrative. It is, but still, I want to dig into this and showcase why I heavily disagree with this common sentiment. Essentially, this video will be focusing on why I believe the homunculi were better in Brotherhood, and where I think 2003's go so wrong. So as I previously established, the main difference going for the 2003 cast is their ties to human transmutation. Human transmutation is the act of bringing a human back to life using alchemy, the very thing the main characters attempt to do at the very start of the series, resulting in the loss of their bodies. Because of that, we've already seen the toll it takes on a human attempting to perform it. Through the perspectives of the homunculi, we see what it's like being brought back to existence as a result of human transmutation, and the effects that has on them is best showcased through the eyes of lust, sloth, wrath, and envy, who all have their own struggles and desires that have resulted from their predicament. Lust is a homunculus based on Scar's older brother's lover. While she's initially characterized as a cold, calculating, and cruel woman, as the story continues, we start to see a more sympathetic, personal side to her. She's often lost in thought, reminiscing on the one memory of her past life she ever had, and wondering what it means, wondering if she can ever become human again. It's this desire that ultimately pushes her into sympathizing with the plight of the main characters, particularly Scar. They both collectively recognize each other after all. Eventually, desperation pushes her away from Dante and the rest of the homunculi, but this ultimately leads to her tragic end at the hands of Wrath. Sloth, as it turns out, is the homunculus copy of the Elric's brother's mother, Trisha. She vaguely remembers the brothers, but This upsets her, and in a desperate bid to free herself from her past identity, she attempts to kill the brothers. This causes an interesting dynamic between the Elric brothers, who are split on whether or not she's actually their mother and what they should do about her. Wrath is the son of the Elric's mentor, Izumi Curtis, who died at birth. She attempted to bring him back using alchemy, but similarly to what happened with the Elric's mother, this failed. She gave the resulting creature to the gate, where the boy remained until the start of the series. As a result, the boy is heavily traumatized by experiences in the gate, where he was shrouded in nothing but darkness for years. While initially a bit shy and playful when the characters meet him, when Envy gives him the Philosopher's Stones to feed on, he turns against Izumi and the Elrics and antagonizes them through the rest of the story. However, he also showcased a desperation to have the motherly affection he never had in his life, which resulted in him wrapping his hands around Trisha, who willingly fits the role for him. Unfortunately, this obsession results in her death, and alongside the aforementioned fear of the gate, it results in his immobilization for the rest of the series, as he ultimately becomes too much for Dante to handle. And finally, there's Envy, who in this series is the homunculus copy of the son of Dante and Hohenheim, the Elric's father, thus making him the older brother to the Elrics. As a result of Hohenheim abandoning Dante and him, Envy has developed a seething hatred of the maid, even crossing the gate upon hearing that Hohenheim is on the other side of it. He similarly hates the Elrics simply for being related to Hohenheim, but also likely out of, fittingly, envy, as Hohenheim likely showed more love to his brothers than he ever did for him. Again, I really want to commend Studio Bones for using the little material from the manga at the time to create such unique backstories for the homunculi. Tying them all to Human Transmutation was a really smart idea, and I do think in the cases of characters like Sloth and Lust, it results in two great characters with memorable and well-told story arcs, even if they both end in tragedy. Now, that being said, you might have noticed I only said two great characters and story arcs. You might have also noticed that when listing examples of the homunculi, I only mentioned 4 out of the 7. Well, there's a reason for that. While on paper, I think the Human Transmutation connection is a great idea that inherently gives these characters much more depth, in execution, it isn't nearly as well done as you might expect, and to see that all you have to do is turn your attention to the other set of homunculi. Greed exists purely to elaborate on the homunculi's backstory, their abilities such as regen, hint at the identity of the main antagonist, and reveal the homunculi's weaknesses. Particularly, there remains being necessary to know their ability to regenerate. In terms of characterization, he's incredibly straightforward and lacks an interesting or satisfying arc to carry him through the story. This, by itself, is fine. A character acting as a tool to help the story move along is absolutely not a bad thing, but in this case, the way it is done, it results in Greed, the character by himself, feeling like an afterthought. Pride, or Bradley, mainly just chills in the background being this menacing threat. While he shows up every now and then, after he kills Greed's squad, he's basically just chilling in the back until he has to fight Mustang, and little if anything is done with his human origins or his character as a whole. And Gluttony, don't even get me started. This isn't exclusive to 2003, but Gluttony's role is simply to be in the background and be someone to bounce off of Lust for 80% of his screen time. Nothing is done with his background, he has no character arc, and at the end of the series he's unceremoniously written off when Dante rewires his mind because she was getting tired of him grieving over the loss of Lust. Afterwards, he's just a mindless creature that kills Dante off screen, and then gets killed by Wrath and Shambhala. His role is so minimal that the FMA Wikia doesn't even give them a dedicated page for their 2003 version, and what is written is literally a little over a paragraph long. Sure, Gluttony already wasn't a major factor in the manga either, but fuck. Hell, not even the homunculi who get the time of day are free from faults. For example, Wrath's character change from kind and shy to villainous and evil is incredibly abrupt. One second he's a good kid, and then after eating some Philosopher's Stones given to him by Envy, he's completely transformed into an asshole. Maybe there's some thematic reason behind it, but narratively it's very sudden. Then there's Envy. Despite how interesting his shared lineage with the Elrics is, the series hardly does anything with it until the very end of the series. For the most part, all that's done with it is just him grumbling about how much he fucking hates Hohenheim. Now, let me clarify two important things. I recognize that not all of the homunculi needed the series to completely expand upon their backstories and how they feel about their past life and their desires. In fact, it makes more sense that each member of their team simply has their own feelings towards their past lives, and some just decide it's not worth dwelling upon. I also feel the need to express that I'm not trying to call the 2003 homunculi bad characters. They're all good, except for Gluttony, and serve their purpose as well. It's just that a lot of the depth that people tell me is here instead feels like it's purely hypothetical for many of these characters. A lot of the potential has been left on the cutting room floor. And it makes sense, 2003 only had a little over half of its runtime available to do so much with an already large cast. I'm gonna be honest, the reasons I prefer Brotherhood's version of the characters is more as a result of the feeling that 2003 didn't do enough with the concepts it presented with its versions of the characters. But I point all of this out because I want people to realize that these tragic backstories don't inherently make these characters better. They're still fine, but there's a lot of potential we're not seeing. So why is it that I prefer the Brotherhood versions of the characters? It's not like the series Homunculi are tragic characters who were once human and have to deal with being brought back to life as Homunculi. They're all simply spin-offs of their overall main antagonist, Father. So what in my eyes makes them better? Well, it's simple. Characterization. This is going to be a little hard to explain because I don't quite mean it in the same way as the basic definition is meant to be interpreted, as said definition implies all aspects of the characters from writing quality to backstory and development to design. When I say characterization, I'm talking about one specific aspect of the character. To get to the bottom of it, let me raise a question for you, the audience. What are the general characteristics of the 2003 Homunculi? This is ignoring their backstories and tragedy and the fact that they all have their quirky things from their past to deal with. What do they act like? What do they do in any given situation? How do they talk to each other? How do they talk to other people in general? And the answer is pretty simple. Wrath is always cocky, angry, and brash towards others, but nothing but soft and kind towards Sloth. Envy is a straightforward, evil-ass guy who makes sure to mock people while tearing down their world. Lust is cruel, calm, and calculating at times, but when push comes to shove, also a bit thoughtful and sympathetic. Pride is stern, serious, but patient and calm. Gluttony is absent-minded and naive. Sloth is pretty cold and distant, seemingly apathetic, but with a small soft spot for wrath. And you might think, like, of course, those are their character traits. Like, what are you trying to get at? And that's actually the issue. The specific ways your character interacts, I think, is one of the more important, very underrated elements to writing. This is because, like, think about it, I think there are a number of great examples of characters who have absolutely nothing. No tragedies, no backstories, no development, no nothing. But they still stand up on their own 2 feet purely because the author went out of their way to give them a lot of depth in the way they react to things. And if not that, maybe hint at other elements of their personality through the way they act. Or if not that, they just make sure every interaction they have is something worth sitting through because they have such charisma and memorability. I think a great example of the latter is the characters from Yu Yu Hakusho, particularly the side characters. In particular, the female characters like Botan, Kuwabara's sister, Keiko, or Juri and Koto. Really, just any interaction with the female cast when they're watching the tournaments on the sidelines is a great example of that. And if not that, you have Carrot from One Piece, Bambietta from Bleach. Ignore the fact that they're all women, that's kind of sexist, not gonna lie. But there's so many characters who I came to enjoy watching anime, reading books, or just going through media. Not because they were developing or because of some backstory that managed to play into their character while the story was going on. No, it was because these characters were fun to sit down and have interact with others. And I don't think people talk about this, but I think we can all agree that this is a very important element to characters because, you know, there are so many famous characters who have no development, no tragic backstories or whatever, like Speedwagon from JoJo. He's one of the most beloved characters from all of the series, and nobody has any beef with him in spite of that. It's the reason I feel Aizen from Bleach is so popular. Aizen has, like, no backstory, no development, but everyone loves him because he has this presence to him, this it factor to what he does, this feeling that is wholly unique, at least for this era of shonen. Just this mastermind who stands on the sidelines. He always has your attention. I will admit there is a huge element of subjectivity to this, but nonetheless, I do feel like objectively, I think that this is an element we can all agree is important to character writing, and I feel like 2003, while it isn't terrible in this regard, it isn't quite the best. I think that bad character writing is when your characters are all bland and they blend together. I think a great example is Naruto Shippuden. I think that as it goes along, a lot of its cast starts to melt together. This is best exemplified in the Pain arc, where, like, you could remove the panels and when the characters talk, you wouldn't really know who's talking at a certain point. Kishimoto does get a little better with that as Shippuden gets past that arc, but after this point, a common through line is that the characters have become kind of bland, one-note characters with their only personality traits being exaggerated versions of what they had been in the Chunin exams and Sasuke retrieval arcs. And look, part of the reason this whole character writing thing is so important to me is because you could have a character with insanely serious character growth and development. If I don't feel like this character is particularly engaging to me, not just through the way he is being developed, but also through the way they are written and characterized, the way they act, then I'm hard-pressed to care. Sometimes character development or throwing a sad backstory at me isn't enough, and this is the case with a lot of people. Like, I'm gonna throw out an example offhand, but that Mist guy from Demon Slayer Season 3, his whole shtick is that he has no emotions. He cares about nothing but getting the job done, and his whole story is that he has to learn to care about others and develop a personality, but he was just so boring that I never got engaged with the narrative they were pushing with him. Sure, it was nice seeing him go from a soulless goon to an upbeat kid, but I simply wasn't engaged when the story wanted me to be. Like, you could have serious, engaging, interesting development or stories following your characters, but if their personality along the way is bland or one note, it's not going to be nearly as interesting or satisfying or engaging without the sense of actual character behind that. And that's where I feel 2003 kind of fucks up. Because you look at a lot of these characters and just see a lot of their personality traits and just... a lot of them are written so blandly. Like, starting with Wrath, it honestly feels like for him he only has two traits post meeting Envy. It's either A, being a dick and antagonizing at her owl, or B, crying because he wants his mom. These aren't necessarily problems, these can be tools for more interesting character moments, but pretty much all of them are incredibly straightforward in their approach to doing things. Compare that to, say, Pride from Brotherhood, where every scene he's in is just him standing there menacingly, but there's an element of underlying creepiness to the things he does that adds a sense of unpredictability to his character, and an element of tension that the audience latches onto. Wrath, to me, at best, has a scene where he tries to kill Rose and her baby because the baby's crying causes him to have a PTSD episode, but otherwise the story really doesn't do enough with his characterization outside of the previously discussed scenario. Bradley in Brotherhood has so many fantastic moments that really round out his character. A favorite of mine is the flashback to the negotiations linked to the Ishvalan genocide. When told that a god of the Ishvalans will surely strike down Bradley for his crimes, he just tells them, "And where the fuck is this god? Surely he would have killed me by now if I'm this bad." Another good example to me is when Ed and Al end up at Bradley's house after he had already revealed the truth to them and coldly points out, "Yeah, I'm a fucking homunculi, but I also have a family," letting the characters and the audience drink in the implications. In 2003, once he's revealed to be a homunculi, he truly kind of just becomes a robot, honestly. Look, I think the point I'm getting across with this Bradley comparison is best demonstrated through a scene that perfectly contrasts the family man scene from Brotherhood I mentioned a second ago, to when Bradley, enraged at his son's dumb fuckery of a decision to bring his human remains to a fight with Roy, well, gets murdered on the spot by him, implying Bradley may not have cared too much about him or his family as a whole. We wouldn't know, the series never bothered with that element of his character. Does that make 2003 Bradley a bad character? No, he's not even a boring one personally. I just feel this is a less interesting direction with his character compared to what the manga and Brotherhood would do with him. I don't really think I need to talk about Greed, who in Brotherhood goes through an entire story arc, but that's personally outside the scope of my video since the goal of it is to point out how story arcs, characters' growth, and backstory aren't inherent indicators of better characters, though it just how happens that in this case it absolutely is. Moving aside, even Gluttony feels like he has something more character-wise in Brotherhood. His one scene in Brotherhood I remember really liking was when he swallows Envy and is trying to figure out what he'll do next. He's just fucking around all night until Alphonse asks him if he can take him to where his creator is, and bro just agrees, no questions asked, and he does just that. While we already knew Gluttony was a very childish character, this is the first time I felt like we really got a good focus on that. It's crazy how a scene like this makes me pop more than when he's mourning the death of Lust in 2003, which is purely because the 2003 scene I just mentioned wasn't written with the sense that we need to get the audience to feel that sadness with him. Speaking of Lust, I still think Lust is better in 2003, but I do like the little bits of Brotherhood Lust we do get. Her highlight, aside from her death, being when she plays along with Havoc's line about loving women with big boobs, showcasing a playful side to her character. She already had an element of mischievousness, but the sheer childishness of the situation adds a lot. Similarly, the scene in the manga when Envy is first introduced. While the scene is initially portrayed with a level of seriousness, she immediately makes this goofy ass face when expressing how vile Envy is. I think that just shows how unserious these motherfuckers are. Speaking of unseriousness, and speaking of Envy too, he's the best example of this. Envy in Brotherhood is just pure evil. He murdered a man by turning into his wife. He shot a little girl point blank in the face, and he did both with a goddamn fucking smile on his face. And yet, at the very end of the series, when he starts crying because Ed called him out on the fact that he is Envy, because he himself is envious of humans and their connections, which led to him killing himself, I was emotional for him. Yet when I saw him die in 2003, I didn't even fucking notice. Why is that? Brotherhood envy takes joy in everything he does, and as such, every scene he has this insane amount of energy and charisma to it. When he's about to fight Ed in the underground lab and Ed's arm breaks, instead of just evil laughing and knocking him out, he childishly shouts, "Lucky me!" and then knocks him out. When he's returning Ed to his bodyguards, he laughs like he won at a game of tag or some shit. There's a scene where he confronts the squad after they kidnap Gluttony and starts immediately throwing hands. And Envy just goes, no, I'm not trying to fight you right now. And he's completely dumbfounded to learn that the only reason Ed was on site with him was purely because he called him short several episodes before. When he gets the call about Marco's whereabouts, he's sitting on Bradley, the fucking king's desk, and quips up like he just got a job offer. Every scene he is in is a joy. And despite being this inhumane, evil bastard, he feels pretty human. Like, behind that cruelty is a person who, maybe in a different world, could have been a good, fun guy. Like, when you dial back and see how Envy is characterized, you see a bit of humanity behind them. To me, there's so much more depth here in the way they're presented over the course of Brotherhood compared to 2003, where his depth, at most, is, I hate my dad, I hate you for being related to my dad, I'm gonna run around pouting about it and laughing like an asshole. He does have some elements of his manga self in there, especially towards the start of the series, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely dialed back a lot, and he's presented mostly as being this simple, mustache-twirling femboy. That's where I think 2003 Envy falls short for me. Am I trying to suggest that 2003 is bad for this? No, it absolutely isn't. The Homunculi are all still good characters in 2003, and very importantly, all serve their roles in the larger story for the most part. Well, I just feel that there was more that could have been done with them in that regard, and that praise that these characters get for having depth that I don't quite see confuses me. Again, I honestly prefer Brotherhood less for what it does on its own and more for what 2003 doesn't do. But I wanted to make this video to point out how character writing still does go a long way in making characters feel, fully dimensional. It's not just tragic backstories and character development. You can give a character depth simply by focusing on how they bounce off of others, how they act, and even if you don't necessarily give them depth through that, you can still make the audience love them. If I can tie this into something I said offhandedly at the start of the video, I really do wish a lot of 2003 versus Brotherhood discourse took into account a lot of the nuances of this aspect of writing, because it honestly is a little eye-rolling when people come to the conclusion that simply because the Homunculi have this element to their background in 2003, which makes them more tragic and almost justified, it makes them inherently better characters than their more straightforwardly, mostly pure evil Brotherhood counterparts. Like, in theory it could be, but the end result makes me feel this isn't necessarily the case. Not to suggest people can't like 2003 versions more, I just don't see it as being an objective truth when taking into account the elements of their characterization and how 2003 handles the Homunculi. In general, FMA 2003 versus Brotherhood discourse is kinda ass. Like, enjoy what you want, both are good, and they aren't going anywhere. Kind of, 2003 ain't anywhere online, legally. But going back to that discourse thing, a lot of the main talking points are kind of iffy anyways when you dig deep into them. Like, a lot of people like to claim that Brotherhood cuts out a lot in order to reach the material 2003 didn't cover as fast as possible, but if you've actually read the manga, you find that Brotherhood actually covers most of that stuff pretty faithfully. Not entirely, of course, but the amount of stuff cut out is actually surprisingly low, and what is cut out wouldn't really change the quality of the story, except for a handful of scenes. Maybe I should make a video going deeper into this, as it's probably one of the largest misconceptions of any anime I've ever seen, right next to 1999 Hunter x Hunter being this dark, mature anime that completely goes against the themes of 2011. I wonder why I'm referencing this very out there discussion. It's almost like I have made a video on this subject that I all want you to see because it's really good. So, I guess that's it for this video. I kind of expected to be a little longer, but I touched upon everything I wanted. Maybe I'll go in depth on this subject someday, but for now, I thank you all for watching the video, and I recommend liking and subscribing to help support my channel so it can grow and my videos can get recommended more. You could also comment about how fucking annoying my voice is if you want, I wouldn't mind. In fact, I agree. So that's gonna be it. Thanks for watching, I'll see you all next time. By the way, notice how I never once touched upon Brotherhood slot? That's how you know I'm not a Brotherhood dick writer. I'm not about to gas that motherfucker up.